What's next? A cult humiliating, a black street dog, fixing my jet?
50 engineers laughed. Faith Brooks, 22, homeless, black, stood 3 feet away holding a wrench.
Cockroaches don't belong in cockpits. Go crawl.
Nobody said a word, but Preston had a problem.
Back to
His
your
$100
dumpster.
million jet, grounded 48 days, 50 top mechanics, all failed. And the only person who could fix it was the black girl he just called a cockroach. Preston's jaw tightened. He had no choice. Fine, let the cockroach try. Film everything. When this rat breaks something, I want it on camera. He thought he was setting a trap. What those cameras actually recorded was the most humiliating moment of Preston Caldwell's entire career. And the beginning of the end of everything he built. Let me tell you how we got here. Caldwell Aerospace Industries sits on 200 acres south of Houston, Texas. Private airstrip, 6 hangars, a campus big enough to have its own zip code. Preston Caldwell built it from nothing, or at least that's the story he tells at galas. Truth is, his daddy's oil money bought the first hangar. Preston just kept buying. The crown jewel of the whole operation was the CA-90, a next-generation executive jet, twin engines, top speed just under the sound barrier. Price tag? $100 million. Preston called it the future of private aviation. The Pentagon called it interesting. A $500 million defense contract was on the table, the kind of deal that turns a rich man into a dynasty. All Preston had to do was fly the CA-90 for a Pentagon delegation in 16 days. One problem: the CA-90 couldn't fly. 48 days earlier, during a routine test flight, both engines flamed out at 14,000 feet. No warning, no buildup, just silence where thunder used to be. The pilots barely glided it back to the runway. One of them quit the next morning. Since then, the jet had been sitting in Hangar 3 like a beautiful, useless sculpture. Preston threw everything at it. He brought in his best internal team, 12 senior mechanics who had built the thing from blueprints. They pulled the engines apart, rebuilt them, ran every diagnostic in the book. The engines would start. They'd run for about 90 seconds, smooth, clean, perfect readings across the board. Then they'd shut down. Both of them, at the same time. Same fault code every single time. No explanation. So Preston brought in outside consultants. Engine manufacturer reps flew in from Connecticut. Independent aerospace specialists from California. A former Air Force turbine expert from Colorado. 50 mechanics total. $8 million in diagnostics. New parts, new software, new theories every Monday morning. Same result every time. 90 seconds. Shutdown. Fault code. The whiteboard in Hangar 3 told the whole story. It was covered in theories. Fuel contamination, software glitch, sensor malfunction, wiring fault, turbine blade microfracture. Every single one had been tested. Every single one had been crossed out in red marker. The hangar smelled like jet fuel and frustration. Mechanics argued over tablets. Engineers stopped making eye contact with each other. The company's stock had dropped 12% since the grounding. Preston was bleeding $3 million a week in contract penalties. And that's when Faith Brooks entered the picture. Not through the front door, not with a resume, not with a handshake from the right person, through a chain-link fence, with a pair of borrowed binoculars. Faith lived in a converted cargo van parked in a gravel lot 3 blocks from the Caldwell campus. The van used to deliver restaurant supplies. Now it was her bedroom, her kitchen, and her workshop, all in 60 square feet. Every morning she woke before sunrise. She walked 40 minutes to the Houston Public Library. She sat in the same chair, at the same table, and she read. Not novels, not magazines. FAA technical publications. Aviation maintenance manuals. Turbine engine theory. Fuel system schematics. She'd been doing this for years, long before the CA-90 existed, long before she ever heard the name Caldwell. She read the way some people breathe, like she'd die without it. After the library closed, she walked back to her van. Along the way, she'd stop at junkyards. She'd buy broken parts for pennies, small engines, generators, outboard motors. She'd carry them back to her van and fix them by flashlight. Then she'd sell the working engines to local mechanics for cash. Enough for food, enough for fuel, enough to survive one more day. The mechanics in that neighborhood knew her. Old Tommy at the diesel shop called her the girl with the ears because she could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it idle. Ray at the boatyard said she had the best hands he'd ever seen, and he'd been in the trade for 30 years. But outside that 3-block radius, nobody knew Faith Brooks existed. She first noticed the CA 96 weeks into the grounding. She could see Hangar 3 from the fence line. She watched the mechanics come and go. She read about the crisis in newspapers that people left behind on park benches. And she started thinking. Not guessing. Thinking. The way her grandfather taught her. Start with what you hear, then what you smell, then what you feel. She didn't have access to the diagnostic logs. She didn't have the schematics. But she had something those 50 mechanics didn't. She had a theory that none of them had considered. That's how Denise Campbell found her. Denise was the facilities coordinator at Caldwell Aerospace, 34 years old, black, the kind of person who shows up early, stays late, and never gets thanked for it. She handled building access, parking assignments, supply orders, the invisible work that keeps a company running. One Tuesday morning, Denise was walking the perimeter for a routine security check when she noticed a young woman standing at the fence, holding binoculars, staring at Hangar 3. Denise's first instinct was to call security, but something stopped her. The woman wasn't taking photos. She wasn't acting suspicious. She was studying. The way an engineer studies, focused, patient, still. Denise walked over. "Can I help you?" Faith lowered the binoculars. "That jet in Hangar 3, the CA-90, both engines flame out at 90 seconds, right?" Denise blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because the shutdown is symmetrical. That means it's not an engine problem. It's a system that connects both engines. And there's only one system that does that." Denise had worked at Caldwell for 6 years. She'd heard 50 mechanics talk about the CA-90. Not one of them had said anything like that. "Who are you?" Denise asked. "Nobody," Faith said. "I'm nobody." But Denise didn't walk away. She stood at that fence for 20 minutes, listening to a homeless girl explain turbine engine theory with more clarity than anyone she'd ever heard in the building behind her. That night, Denise couldn't sleep. She knew what would happen if she spoke up. She was a facilities coordinator, not an engineer. A black woman in a company where the executive floor was all white and all male. Speaking out of turn could end her career, but she also knew what she'd heard, and she couldn't unhear it. The next morning, Denise found Neil Garrison. Neil was the senior lead mechanic, 45 years old, quiet, the kind of man who kept his head down and his hands busy. He'd been at Caldwell for 18 years, and he was the only person on the team who hadn't blamed someone else for the failure. Neil was desperate, not for credit, for an answer. When Denise told him about the girl at the fence, he didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just said, "Bring her in." Neil arranged a visitor pass, called it a consultant observation. It was a stretch of his authority, and he knew it, but 50 failures will make a man flexible. Faith walked into Hangar 3 the next morning. She was wearing a second-hand mechanic's jumpsuit from a donation bin. Her dreadlocks were pulled back. She carried a canvas tool roll under her arm, old, worn, stitched in places where the fabric had torn. The mechanics stared. Some whispered. A few smirked. Then Todd Whitmore saw her. Todd was the VP of engineering, 38 years old, the kind of man who measured people by their badge level. He'd been Preston's gatekeeper for 6 years, keeping the wrong people out and the right people grateful. He walked straight toward Faith. "Who let you in here?" Neil stepped forward. "She's with me, Todd. Consultant observation." Todd looked Faith up and down, slowly, the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. "This is a restricted aerospace facility, Neil, not a community outreach program." He said it loud enough for the room. A few mechanics chuckled. Faith said nothing. She walked past Todd, straight to the open engine nacelle. She leaned in. She listened to the residual tick of cooling metal. She smelled the exhaust residue. She ran one finger along the fuel line. Then she turned to Neil and said one sentence. One technical observation about the fuel manifold pressure behavior that made Neil go completely still. Todd overheard it. "Where'd you read that? Off a cereal box?" More laughter. Louder this time. Faith didn't respond. She just looked at Neil, and Neil looked back at her with an expression Todd had never seen on his face before. It was the look of a man who just realized the answer had been standing outside the fence for 6 weeks. "Come back tomorrow," Neil said quietly. "I'll get you proper clearance." Todd watched them walk away. His smirk was gone. Something had just shifted in Hangar 3. He could feel it, and he didn't like it one bit. What Faith saw in 30 seconds, what she heard in the engine's cooling tick, was something 50 trained mechanics and $8 million in diagnostics had completely missed. And she was about to prove it. Stay with me. This is where everything changes. To understand what Faith Brooks heard in that engine, you have to understand where her ears were trained. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A one-room repair shop on the corner of a street most people drove past without noticing. The sign out front read, "Brooks Engine Works," in hand-painted letters that had faded twice and been repainted 3 times. That shop belonged to Elton Brooks, Faith's grandfather. Elton was a Korean War veteran, served 2 years as a field mechanic in some of the worst conditions the military could offer. Freezing temperatures, no spare parts, engines that had to run or men would die. He learned to fix things with whatever he had: wire, tape, a prayer, and 2 hands that never shook. When he came home, nobody gave him a parade. No one offered him a job. He was a black man in Louisiana in the 1950s, so he built his own shop. 40 years he ran it. 40 years of lawnmowers, boat motors, generators, truck engines, and anything else that people dragged through his door. He never got rich. He never got famous. But every mechanic within 50 miles knew his name. And every single one of them respected it. Faith came to live with Elton when she was 6 years old. Her parents were killed in a car accident on Interstate 10 during a rainstorm. No other family came forward. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins willing to take in a child. Elton was 68 years old. He had bad knees, worse eyesight, and a shop that barely broke even. But he took that girl home the same night and never once called it a burden. He couldn't afford tutors. He couldn't afford summer camps. He couldn't afford the things other kids had. But he had a shop full of engines, and that turned out to be enough. Faith's classroom was a workbench. Her textbooks were repair manuals with oil-stained pages. Her homework was a broken 2-stroke motor and a set of wrenches. By the time she was 8, she could take apart a lawnmower engine and put it back together blindfolded. Not because Elton pushed her, because she loved it. She loved the logic of machines. Every part had a purpose. Every sound meant something. Nothing was random. By 12, she was rebuilding carburetors for paying customers. Elton would sit on his stool, arms crossed, watching her work. He never corrected her during the job. He'd wait until she was done, then ask one question. "What did the machine tell you?" That was his method. He never gave answers. He'd set a broken engine in front of Faith and walk away. No instructions, no hints. Just the engine and the girl and however long it took. "Listen to it," he'd say. "Machines talk to people who pay attention." Faith thought he was being poetic. It took her years to realize he was being literal. A healthy engine has a rhythm. A sick engine has a different rhythm. The difference is sometimes so small that gauges won't catch it. But a trained ear will. A trained nose will. Trained fingers will feel a vibration that's 1 degree off true. Elton taught Faith to trust her senses before her instruments. Not instead of instruments, before them. Start with what your body tells you. Then use the tools to confirm. It was old school. It was analog. And it was the exact skill set that modern diagnostics had made obsolete. Or so everyone thought. Elton died when Faith was 16. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning. He was sitting on his stool in the shop, coffee in one hand, AM radio playing blues. Faith found him when she came home from school. The shop was seized for back taxes 3 months later. Everything inside, sold at auction. 40 years of work, gone in an afternoon. Faith was a minor with no family. She entered the foster system. 3 homes in 2 years, none of them good. When she turned 18, she aged out. No home, no money, no diploma. But she had 2 things nobody could take from her. The first was Elton's canvas tool roll. She'd hidden it the night before the auction, tucked it inside her jacket and walked out. It held his personal set of precision instruments. Wrenches, calipers, feeler gauges, each one worn smooth by decades of use, each one still perfectly calibrated. The second was his philosophy. A machine don't care who you are. It only cares if you're right. Faith held on to that sentence the way other people hold on to prayers. Through shelters, through hunger, through winters spent in a van with no heat, through every person who looked at her and saw nothing worth seeing. She kept reading, she kept practicing, she kept listening, because people lied, people judged, people decided what you were worth based on your skin, your address, your clothes. But machines never lied. An engine doesn't know if you're rich or poor, black or white, housed or homeless. It only responds to one thing, whether you're right. And Faith Brooks was right about that jet. Day 50. The CA-90 was still sitting in Hangar 3 like a museum exhibit. Beautiful, useless, bleeding money every hour it stayed on the ground. Preston Caldwell had stopped sleeping. You could see it in his face, the gray skin, the coffee-stained teeth, the tie that wasn't quite straight anymore. 16 days until the Pentagon delegation arrived. 16 days until the $500 million contract review that would either make his company untouchable or expose it as a fraud. He called an emergency all-hands meeting in the main hangar. Everyone came. Every engineer, every mechanic, every department head. Even Colleen Archer showed up, a freelance tech journalist who'd been circling the story for weeks, smelling blood in the water. Preston stood on a raised platform in front of the grounded jet. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. 50 days, 50 mechanics, $8 million. And this aircraft still can't hold an idle for 2 minutes. He let that hang in the air. The next team that fails, you're done. Not reassigned, not suspended. Done. I'll personally walk you to the parking lot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then he made his announcement. I've brought in an independent evaluator, Dr. Lorraine Sutter, former NASA propulsion engineer. She will assess our diagnostics and deliver a final recommendation before the Pentagon review. A murmur went through the room. Everyone in aerospace knew that name. Dr. Sutter had spent 30 years at NASA designing propulsion systems for spacecraft. She'd retired 5 years ago, but her reputation hadn't. When Lorraine Sutter said an engine worked, the FAA didn't argue. Preston was bringing in the biggest gun in the industry, not because he trusted her, because he'd run out of options. While Preston was making threats from his platform, Neil Garrison was making a decision in the back of the hangar. He'd been working with Faith for 3 days, quietly, off the books. After hours, when Todd Whitmore had gone home and the security cameras were on a loop that Neil had memorized over 18 years. Faith hadn't touched the engine, not once. She'd only observed. She sat on an overturned crate near the nacelle and she listened. She asked Neil to start the engines twice. Both times she closed her eyes and tilted her head like a dog hearing a frequency no one else could detect. She asked to see the diagnostic logs, all of them. Every run from the past 50 days. Neil printed them out, 300 pages. Faith spread them across the hangar floor and crawled between them on her hands and knees for 4 hours. Then she asked for something no one had thought to do. Can you overlay the left and right engine logs? Same time axis, side by side. Neil stared at her. In 50 days, across 50 mechanics, not a single person had compared both engines simultaneously. Every diagnostic protocol treated each engine as an independent system. That was standard procedure. That was how it was taught. That was how it had always been done. Faith wasn't trained in how it had always been done. Neil ran the overlay, and when he saw what appeared on the screen, He sat down slowly and didn't say anything for a long time. He knew, right then, she was right. But knowing and proving are two different things. Faith was a homeless civilian with no credentials, no clearance, and no standing in the aerospace industry. Her word meant nothing in that building. She needed a witness, someone whose word meant everything. Neil went to Dr. Sutter directly. He found her in the conference room reviewing 50 days of failure reports with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. He told her everything. The girl at the fence, the theory, the overlaid logs. Dr. Sutter listened without interrupting. When Neil finished, she asked one question. Where is she now? They met in the break room. Faith sat across from Dr. Sutter with nothing but a paper cup of water and her grandfather's tool roll on the table between them. Dr. Sutter didn't introduce herself. She didn't make small talk. She looked at Faith and said, "Tell me what's wrong with that aircraft." Faith told her. She spoke for 6 minutes. No notes, no hesitation. She described the cross-feed valve system, the fuel distribution architecture, the sensor feedback loop, and the specific failure mode she believed was causing the symmetrical shutdown. All in technical language precise enough to pass a graduate-level oral exam. Dr. Sutter asked 3 follow-up questions. Each one was designed to test whether Faith truly understood the system or had simply memorized terminology. Faith answered all 3 without pausing. Dr. Sutter removed her glasses. She cleaned them slowly with the hem of her blazer. She put them back on. She looked at Faith the way you look at something you didn't think existed anymore. "I'd like to see you demonstrate this," she said. The next morning, Hangar 3 was full. Dr. Sutter had used her authority as independent evaluator to authorize what she called a diagnostic demonstration. She'd invited Preston, Todd, the entire engineering team, and she hadn't objected when Colleen Archer walked in with a recorder. Preston saw Faith standing near the engine nacelle and his face went dark red. "Lorraine, you can't be serious. You're staking your professional reputation on a street kid?" Dr. Sutter didn't look at him when she answered. "I'm staking my reputation on evidence, Preston. Something your team hasn't produced in 50 days. Todd tried to shut it down. He cited safety protocols, liability concerns, security clearance requirements, insurance restrictions. He went through every procedural roadblock he could think of. Dr. Sutter let him finish. Then she said very calmly, "As independent evaluator appointed by your CEO, I have full authority to approve diagnostic personnel. This demonstration will proceed. If you'd like to file an objection, I suggest you do it in writing after we're done." Todd opened his mouth, closed it, stepped back. The hangar went quiet. Faith stood in front of the CA-90's open-engine nacelle, 30 people watching. Preston with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Todd against the far wall, pale. Colleen's recorder running. Dr. Sutter at the diagnostic console beside Neil. Faith unrolled her grandfather's canvas toolkit on a clean cloth. The tools inside were old, worn. Some of them had been rehandled with electrical tape. They looked like they belonged in a museum, not in front of a $100 million aircraft. She looked at Neil. "Start the engines." Neil glanced at Dr. Sutter. She nodded once. He initiated the start sequence. Both engines began to spool up. The sound filled the hangar, a deep building roar that vibrated in your chest and made your teeth hum. 30 people held their breath. Faith closed her eyes, and she listened. Revelation 1. The sound. The engines idled, rough, unsteady. The same unstable rhythm that 50 mechanics had heard for 50 days. To everyone in that hangar, it sounded like a sick engine doing what sick engines do. To Faith, it sounded like a conversation. She held up one finger, not to the crowd, to Neil. Wait. 8 seconds passed. Then she held up 2 fingers. Another 8 seconds. 2 fingers again. She opened her eyes. "Kill the right engine. Keep the left running." Neil hesitated. That wasn't standard. You don't run a twin-engine jet on one side inside a hangar without safety clearance. Dr. Sutter gave the nod. Neil shut down the right engine. The left engine kept running. And here's what changed. The idles smoothed out. Not perfectly, but noticeably. The stutter that had been cycling every 8 seconds reduced to almost nothing. "Now swap," Faith said. "Right engine only." Neil restarted the right, killed the left. Same result. The right engine ran rough, but without the rhythmic stutter. Faith turned to Dr. Sutter. "It's not the engines. It's what happens when both engines run together." She asked Neil to pull up the fault logs on the diagnostic console. Not the summary reports that every mechanic had been reading. The raw data, millisecond-level timestamps. "Overlay them, left and right, same time axis." Neil did it. The data appeared on the screen. 2 lines running side by side. And there it was, a tiny dip in fuel pressure on the left engine, lasting 0.3 of a second, appearing exactly every 8 seconds. Every single dip lined up with a corresponding spike in the right engine's fuel flow. Nobody had seen it before because nobody had looked at both engines at the same time. Every diagnostic protocol in the book isolates each engine as an independent system. You check the left, then you check the right. Separately, always. But the CA90 has a cross-feed system, a butterfly valve that allows fuel to balance between the left and right wing tanks during flight. It's a safety feature. It's also the only system that physically connects both engines' fuel supply. "Your cross-feed valve is cycling," Faith said. "Every 8 seconds it opens when it shouldn't. It pulls fuel from the left engine feed line for 0.3 of a second. That's enough to starve the left engine just slightly, not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to destabilize combustion over time. Run it for 90 seconds and the instability cascades. Both engines read it as a flameout condition and shut down." The room was silent. Neil was staring at the overlaid data like he was seeing it for the first time, because he was. Todd Whitmore spoke from the back wall. "That's a coincidence, not a diagnosis. A 0.3 of a second fuel dip doesn't ground an aircraft." Faith didn't look at him. 50 of them in 90 seconds does." Dr. Sutter wrote something in her notebook. She didn't look up. Revelation 2. The smell. Faith asked Neil to restart both engines. When they spooled up, she did something nobody expected. She walked away from the diagnostic console, away from the engine nacelle. She walked downwind, about 20 feet behind the left engine's exhaust port, and she stood there, breathing, slowly, through her nose. Todd laughed. "What's she doing now, yoga?" Nobody else laughed. Faith stood there for 40 seconds. Then she came back. "There's a chemical in the left engine exhaust that shouldn't be there. It's faint, almost nothing, but it's there. It smells like burning plastic mixed with vinegar." She turned to Neil. "Your crossfeed valve has a fluoroelastomer O-ring that seals the internal chamber. That O-ring is degrading. The smell is the rubber breaking down under heat stress. It's been cooking every time the valve cycles, which is every 8 seconds, over and over for 50 days. She explained it simply. Fluoroelastomer, FKM rubber, is standard in aerospace fuel systems. Tough material, built to handle extreme temperatures. But it has a limit. If the valve is cycling abnormally, opening and closing thousands of times more than it should, the O-ring heats past its rated threshold. It starts to decompose, slowly, microscopically. The decomposition releases trace volatile compounds into the fuel stream. Not enough to trigger the chemical sensors in the diagnostic system. Those sensors are calibrated for major contamination. This was minor, a whisper of contamination. But it was enough to affect combustion stability in the left engine's feed line, a tiny impurity in the fuel mixture that made the already starved engine just a little more unstable during each cycle. "Pull a fuel sample from the left engine's direct feed line," Faith said. "Not from the tank, from the line after the crossfeed valve." Neil drew the sample into a clear container. He held it under the hangar's fluorescent lights. There it was, a faint amber tint. So slight you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. But jet fuel is supposed to be water clear. Any discoloration means something is in it that shouldn't be. Dr. Sutter stood up from her chair. "How did you know to smell for it?" Faith looked at her. "My grandfather used to say your nose knows before the gauge does. He worked on engines for 40 years. He never trusted a sensor he couldn't double-check with his own hands." Preston Caldwell uncrossed his arms. For the first time in 50 days, he wasn't performing authority. He was watching. Actually watching. Todd Whitmore hadn't spoken since his last comment. His face had lost some color. Revelation 3. The touch. 2 findings, both pointing at the crossfeed valve. But the question remained, why was the valve cycling incorrectly? A butterfly valve doesn't just malfunction on its own. Something had to be telling it to open every 8 seconds. Faith asked Dr. Sutter for permission to physically inspect the valve assembly. Dr. Sutter approved it. Faith pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves, took a penlight from her grandfather's tool roll, and reached into the nacelle access panel. She didn't go for the valve itself. She went for the wiring harness, the bundle of wires that carries the signal from the valve's position sensor back to the engine control computer. She ran her fingers along the harness slowly, inch by inch, the way a doctor palpates for a fracture. She followed it from the valve housing up to the bracket where the harness was supposed to be secured to the nacelle frame. She stopped. "Neil, hand me a torque wrench, 1/4-inch drive." Neil handed it over. Faith placed it on the bracket's mounting bolt. She turned it carefully until it engaged. She looked at the digital readout. 3 foot-pounds. She held it up so the room could see. Spec for this bracket is 16 foot-pounds. This bolt is finger-tight. Someone put it in by hand and never torqued it. The room didn't react yet. They didn't understand yet. Faith explained, "This bracket holds the wiring harness in position. When the bolt is properly torqued, the harness is locked tight. No movement, clean signal. But at 3 foot-pounds, the harness has slack. It shifts under engine vibration. Every time it shifts, it sends a noise pulse through the position sensor wire. The engine computer reads that noise as a signal that the fuel tank is low on one side, so it opens the crossfeed valve to balance the tanks. Then the harness shifts back, the noise clears, the computer closes the valve. 8 seconds later, it happens again." She laid it out. The full chain, step by step, one loose bolt, the wiring harness shifts. The position sensor sends a false signal. The crossfeed valve opens unnecessarily. The left engine gets starved for fuel for 3/10 of a second. The abnormal cycling overheats the O-ring. The O-ring degrades. Trace contaminants enter the fuel. The left engine destabilizes. The instability cascades. Both engines read a flameout condition. Shutdown. 1 bolt. 3 foot-pounds instead of 16. That's it. That's what grounded a $100 million jet for 50 days. That's what 50 mechanics, $8 million, and 300 pages of diagnostic logs couldn't find. Because everyone was looking at the engines. Everyone was running software diagnostics and replacing turbine components and reflashing control modules. Nobody knelt down and put their fingers on the wiring harness. Nobody checked a secondary mounting bracket that isn't even on the standard diagnostic checklist. Nobody listened to the machine. Neil Garrison pulled his cap off his head and pressed it against his chest. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 1 bolt. Dr. Sutter closed her notebook. She removed her glasses and set them on the console. She looked at Faith with an expression that 20 years at NASA had taught her to reserve for moments that actually mattered. Todd Whitmore was standing very still against the back wall. His face was the color of old paper. Because Todd Whitmore had just realized something that no one else in the room knew yet. He knew whose name was on the work order for the last maintenance session that touched that bracket. His. Dr. Sutter didn't hesitate. Fix it. 2 words. That's all Faith needed. She started with the bolt. She placed her grandfather's torque wrench on the bracket mounting and tightened it. Slowly. Precisely. The click of each increment echoed through the silent hangar like a heartbeat. 3 foot-pounds. 5. 8. 12. 16. The wrench clicked its final stop. 16 foot-pounds. Exactly to spec. Faith tugged the wiring harness gently. It didn't move. Locked tight. The way it should have been 50 days ago. Next, the O-ring. She asked Neil for a replacement. He checked inventory. Standard fluoroelastomer seal for a crossfeed butterfly valve. Part number printed on a label the size of a postage stamp. Cost? $6. Neil handed it to Faith. She held it up between two fingers so the room could see. This tiny black ring, no bigger than a quarter, was half the reason a $100 million jet couldn't fly. She removed the degraded O-ring from the valve assembly. It came out discolored, slightly warped. You could see the heat damage if you knew what to look for, a faint cracking pattern along the inner surface where the rubber had been cooked by 50 days of abnormal cycling. Faith seated the new O-ring, pressed it into place with her thumb, checked the seal twice, then a third time. Her grandfather's voice, "Do it right or do it again." Finally, the fuel line. The left engine's direct feed line had been carrying trace contaminants from the degraded O-ring for weeks. Clean fuel in, dirty fuel out. Not dirty enough for sensors, but dirty enough to matter. Faith disconnected the feed line at both ends. She flushed it with clean fuel. Twice. Then she reconnected it, checked every fitting, and wiped each connection point with a clean cloth until there wasn't a drop of residue anywhere. Total repair time, 3 hours. Total parts cost, $24. 3 hours and $24. That's what stood between Preston Caldwell and 50 days of failure. Faith stepped back from the nacelle. She wiped her hands on a shop rag. She rolled up her grandfather's toolkit slowly, the way Elton had taught her. Each tool in its pocket, the canvas folded tight, the leather strap wrapped twice and tucked. She looked at Neil. "Start them up." The hangar was completely still. 30 people standing in a semicircle around the CA-90. Preston Caldwell in the center, arms at his sides for once. Todd Whitmore against the far wall, close to the door. Colleen Archer's recorder held at arm's length. Dr. Sutter at the diagnostic console, her glasses back on, both hands flat on the table. Neil initiated the start sequence. The left engine spooled up first. A low whine that climbed in pitch, building through the hangar, filling the space the way a church organ fills a cathedral. Then the right engine joined. The two sounds merged into one continuous roar. The idle stabilized, smooth, even, synchronized, no stutter, no micro-interruption, no 8-second cycle, just the clean, steady hum of two engines doing exactly what they were designed to do. The diagnostic screens lit up green. Every parameter, every sensor, every reading, green across the board. 30 seconds passed. The point where the stutter usually began. Nothing. 60 seconds, 90 seconds, the wall, the exact moment where every previous attempt had ended in shutdown. The engines held. 2 minutes. The screens stayed green. 3 minutes. 5 minutes. Faith stood motionless, watching the nacelle. Not the screens, the nacelle. Listening. 10 minutes. The engines ran flawlessly. Neil pulled off his cap and pressed it to his face. His shoulders shook once. He turned away so nobody would see. Denise Campbell was watching from behind a partition near the hangar entrance. She'd come in through the side door without telling anyone. Her hand was over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. Dr. Sutter closed her notebook for the last time. She removed her glasses, set them on the console, and nodded once. Just once. The nod of a woman who had spent 30 years in propulsion science and still recognized brilliance when it stood in front of her wearing a second-hand jumpsuit. Colleen Archer whispered 3 words into her recorder. "I got it." Preston Caldwell stood alone. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes. He hadn't spoken. His eyes were locked on the engine gauges. The numbers were perfect. The numbers had been perfect for 10 straight minutes, and the person responsible for those numbers was a 22-year-old homeless black woman he had called a cockroach 3 days ago. Faith didn't celebrate. She didn't raise a fist. She didn't smile. She just wiped her hands one more time, tucked the rag into her back pocket, and picked up her grandfather's tool roll. A $6 O-ring, a single under-torqued bolt, and a girl from a cargo van who listened when no one else would. If this story is hitting you right now, if you've ever been the person nobody believed in, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this story isn't over yet. Dr. Sutter filed her independent evaluation report the next morning. She didn't soften it. She didn't dress it up in diplomatic language. She wrote it the way she'd written NASA reports for 30 years. Clear, direct, and impossible to argue with. Root cause: a maintenance error. One under-torqued bracket bolt that triggered a cascading failure across the crossfeed valve system, leading to O-ring degradation, fuel contamination, and symmetrical engine shutdown. 50 mechanics missed it because they followed standard protocol. Standard protocol treats each engine independently. The fault existed in the space between both engines, a space no checklist told them to look. Then she wrote the part that mattered most. Faith Brooks demonstrated diagnostic methodology that surpassed every credentialed team assigned to this aircraft. Her use of auditory, olfactory, and tactile observation identified a failure chain that $8 million in instrument-based diagnostics could not detect. Dr. Sutter formally recommended that Faith be offered a permanent position in the Caldwell Aerospace Diagnostic Engineering Division. Immediately. No probation period. No conditional terms. Preston read the report in his office with the door closed. He read it twice. That afternoon, he sat across from Faith in a conference room. Dr. Sutter was present as a witness. So was Neil. Preston offered Faith a full-time position. The title: Diagnostic Systems Specialist. Dr. Sutter had insisted on that title. Not technician, not assistant, specialist. But Dr. Sutter wasn't finished. She offered to personally sponsor Faith for the FAA Airframe and Power Plant Certification Program. The A&P license, the credential that would give Faith official standing in the industry. The piece of paper that matched what her hands already knew. Faith sat quietly for a moment. Then she accepted, on one condition. She wanted to build a mentorship program. A workshop for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who had talent but no access. Kids like she had been. Kids who could fix anything but couldn't get through the door. Preston agreed without negotiation. He was in no position to say no to anything. That evening, Faith walked into her new workspace for the first time. It had a door, a nameplate. Her name, Faith Brooks, Diagnostic Systems Specialist, printed in clean black letters. She set her grandfather's canvas tool roll on the shelf beside it. Elton would have liked that shelf. Dr. Sutter's report had two sections. The first was about Faith. The second was about Todd Whitmore. The under-torqued bolt didn't torque itself. Somebody left it loose. And somebody signed a maintenance completion form saying every fastener in that nacelle had been checked, verified, and torqued to specification. That somebody was Todd Whitmore. His signature was on the work order, date-stamped, initialed, filed with Caldwell's maintenance records exactly the way the FAA requires. The form stated that all work had been inspected, all fasteners verified, all safety checks completed. It was a lie. Todd hadn't checked the bracket. He probably hadn't checked half the items on that form. He'd signed it the way he signed everything. Quickly, impatiently, because the paperwork was beneath him and the real work was for people below his pay grade. Under FAA regulations, the person who signs a maintenance completion record takes personal legal responsibility for the accuracy of that record. It doesn't matter if a junior mechanic did the actual work, the signature is a guarantee. It means, I verified this. I stand behind it. Todd's signature guaranteed work that wasn't done. In the FAA's language, that's falsification of maintenance records. It carries fines. It carries license suspension. In serious cases, it carries criminal referral. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting match, no confrontation in the hangar. Todd cleaned out his desk on a Friday afternoon while most of the building was in a meeting. He carried one box to his car. He walked past Faith's new workspace on the way out. He didn't look inside. He didn't make eye contact. He just kept walking. That silence said more than anything he could have spoken. Preston Caldwell's reckoning was different, slower, less official, but in some ways, worse. The article included everything. Preston's public comments about Faith, the cockroach remark, the street dog comment, the security guards, all of it, sourced, quoted, and time-stamped from the recordings that Preston himself had ordered. The cameras he demanded to protect himself became the evidence that exposed him.
The article went viral.
Not just in aviation circles, everywhere. Social media turned it into a symbol. The hashtag cockroach in the cockpit trended for 3 days. People shared it with one line. They laughed at her. She fixed their jet. Preston's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Not about the jet, about him, about the company's public image, about the fact that their CEO had been filmed calling a young black woman a cockroach and a street dog. And that woman turned out to be the only competent person in his entire organization. Preston issued a public statement. He acknowledged Faith's contribution. He announced a new company initiative, the Open Talent Program, designed to recruit skilled individuals regardless of traditional credentials or background. The statement was polished, professional, carefully reviewed by 3 lawyers and a PR firm. It was not an apology. The narrator knows this. The audience knows this. Some people learn from their mistakes. Some people just manage them. Preston Caldwell was a manager. But the door he slammed in Faith's face was now permanently open, and he could never close it again. 6 months later, Faith Brooks stood in her workspace at Caldwell Aerospace. On the shelf behind her, Elton's canvas tool roll, a stack of FAA study manuals, and a framed photograph of a one-room repair shop in Baton Rouge with hand-painted letters on the sign. In front of her, 6 kids in matching jumpsuits, ages 14 to 18, all from shelters, all from neighborhoods where nobody handed you anything. They were gathered around an open engine, waiting. Faith picked up a wrench and said the only thing that mattered. Listen to it. Machines talk to people who pay attention. 1 bolt, 1 girl, 1 chance to listen. If you think talent only lives in resumes and corner offices, you haven't been paying attention either. Now here's my question for you. If you were standing in that hangar, would you have given her a chance? Or would you have laughed with everyone else? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you watched this far, there's a detail most people missed. Go back to the moment Faith first walked into Hangar 3. Watch what Neil does with his hands. Most viewers don't catch it the first time. Share this story. Someone in your life needs it today. And subscribe, because the next story is already coming, and it's one you're not going to want to miss.
3 hours, $24, 1 bolt tightened to stake. That's all it took, while 15 mechanics and $8 million couldn't. Faith didn't have a degree, didn't have connections. She had a canvas tool roll from grandfather the world never knew, a man who fixed engines in a one-room shop for 40 years and taught her one thing. Machines talk to people who pay attention. That's the real story here. Not that the system failed, but that the system was never designed to find someone like Faith. Every checklist, every protocol, every credential gate, all built to keep people like her out. And the answer was standing on the other side of the fence the entire time. Talent doesn't wait for permission. It never has. So let me ask you something. How many Faiths have you walked past and never looked twice? How many times have we let someone's appearance answer questions we never even asked? And be honest, if you were standing in that hangar, would you have handed her the wrench? Drop your answer